Part of me wanted to cry when I saw what was in the box. Part of me felt something cold crawl up the back of my neck that I couldn't quite name. But mostly I just stood there in my kitchen on a Tuesday morning in December, holding a tin of homemade cookies like it was something precious, reading my nephew's handwriting on the card for the third time. "Merry Christmas, Aunt Beverly. Made these myself. Hope they're as good as you always made them for me growing up. Love, Sebastian." Sebastian. My sister Agnes's boy. The one I used to sit up with when he had nightmares at age 7. The one I helped put through his first year of community college when Agnes couldn't make rent. The one who called me his second mother at my 60th birthday dinner just 4 years ago, with tears in his eyes that I believed were real. I set the tin on the counter. I didn't open it right away. I had just gotten back from my morning walk and my coffee was still brewing, and something about the way he'd written "made these myself" made me pause. Sebastian had never cooked a day in his life, not once. Every Christmas I'd known him, he showed up with a gas station gift card or nothing at all. Last year he forgot entirely and texted me Happy New Year 2 weeks late. So I left the tin on the counter and poured my coffee and sat down with my crossword puzzle the way I do every morning. I told myself I was being ridiculous. People change. Maybe he'd started cooking. Maybe he had a girlfriend who baked and he wanted to impress me. I told myself a lot of things that morning. What I didn't do was eat the cookies. I don't know exactly why. Call it 64 years of intuition. Call it the fact that I'd been drinking herbal tea instead of sweets since my doctor mentioned my blood sugar in October. Call it whatever you want. I just didn't eat them. I put them on the counter by the fruit bowl and figured I'd bring them to my neighbor Harriet's house later that week. Harriet loves anything homemade. She's been alone since her husband passed, and she lights up whenever someone brings her something. 2 days later, the day after Christmas, Sebastian called. I was washing dishes when the phone rang. He never calls. He texts, usually something short, usually about money or favors. So I dried my hands and answered, "Aunt Beverly." His voice had a cheerfulness to it that didn't quite fit, like a shirt on the wrong body. "Merry Christmas. Did you get the cookies?" "I did," I said. "That was sweet of you, Sebastian. Did you try them?" There it was. Not "did you like them?" or "I hope they were okay," the way you'd ask if you were nervous about a recipe. "Did you try them?" Past tense. Already assuming. "Actually," I said, and I don't know why I said what I said next. Some instinct I can't explain. I brought them over to Harriet. You know how she loves homemade things. She was so touched. The silence lasted exactly long enough to tell me everything. Not a pause. Not a brief quiet while he thought of something to say. A silence with texture to it, dense and strange, the kind that has panic living inside it. "Then, you gave them to who?" His voice had changed completely. The cheerfulness was gone. What was underneath it wasn't grief or hurt feelings. It was something else. Something that made my hand tighten around the phone. "To Harriet," I said. "My neighbor. Sebastian, what's wrong?" "Nothing," he said too fast. "Nothing," he said too fast. "Nothing, those were special. I made them for you. They weren't, they weren't meant to be shared." "Well, she already ate most of them, so—" Another silence. "How is she?" he asked. Did she say anything? Did she feel okay?" "I want you to sit with that for a moment. Did she feel okay?" "I want you to sit with that for a moment. Did she feel okay?" Not did she enjoy them. Not were they good. Did she feel okay? I told him Harriet was fine and I ended the call and I stood in my kitchen for a long time looking at nothing. Let me back up, because you need to understand who Sebastian is and who I am and what was at stake before any of the rest of this makes sense. I am Beverly Okafor. My late husband Raymond and I were married for 31 years before he passed of a heart attack in 2019. Raymond was a good man, a contractor who built things carefully and loved people the same way. We didn't have children of our own. We tried for years and it just wasn't meant to be. So we poured that love into other people's children, into my sister Agnes's kids especially. Agnes had three, Marcus Sebastian and a daughter named Justine who moved to Portland years ago, and who I barely hear from. Of the three, Sebastian was always the one who stayed closest. The one who called, who showed up, who said the right things. Raymond left me comfortable. Not wealthy in any flashy sense, but comfortable. Our house in Dayton, Ohio was paid off. Raymond had a life insurance policy, a pension from the 30 years he worked for the city, and a modest investment account that my financial advisor had helped me grow carefully over the years. All told, somewhere in the range of $800,000 in assets between the house and the accounts. I had a will. I'd had one for years. Raymond and I made it together before he got sick, and after he passed, I updated it. I left the bulk of everything to a combination of my church, a local scholarship fund Raymond had always believed in, and modest amounts to my three nieces and nephews, including Sebastian. What Sebastian didn't know was that 6 months before that Christmas, I had met with my attorney to make changes. Not because of anything dramatic, just because I'd gotten older and clearer about what I wanted. I increased the scholarship fund significantly. I added a small bequest to Harriet, who had been more of a family to me in the years since Raymond died than most of my blood relatives. I reduced Sebastian's share, not eliminated, reduced, because over the past 2 years I had started to see things about him I didn't want to see. The loan requests. The way he'd started asking questions about my plans. My plans for the house, my plans for the accounts. Whether I'd thought about putting him on the deed just for simplicity, whether I had a trust or just a will, and what the difference was for the family. His interest in my finances had quietly shifted from occasional and casual to something more deliberate, more focused. I hadn't told him about the changes. My attorney had told me there was no obligation to do so. What I had told him, in a conversation the previous summer when he pushed a little too hard about the house, was that I was thinking about making some adjustments to the estate plan. I hadn't meant it as a warning. I was just being honest. I understand now that he heard it as a countdown. Harriet called me the morning of December 27th. She sounded tired, which wasn't like her. She said she'd had an awful night. Stomach cramps, nausea, a headache that woke her up at 3 in the morning. She said she'd eaten something that didn't agree with her, probably the cookies, since they were the only thing she'd eaten that evening that was out of the ordinary. She wasn't accusing anyone of anything. She was just reporting it the way older women report illness, matter-of-factly, without drama. I drove her to the urgent care clinic that afternoon. What they found in her blood work alarmed them enough to call the hospital. Traces of a substance. I won't use the clinical name because it doesn't matter, and because saying it out loud still makes me feel sick. That doesn't occur naturally in food. Something that, in a larger quantity, or in someone with a compromised system, could have caused serious organ damage. Or worse. Harriet is 71 and takes medication for her heart. The hospital called the police. The police came to my house 2 days later and asked if I still had the cookie tin. I did. Sebastian had sent the cookies in a decorated tin, and I had brought it to Harriet, but taken the tin back home with me to reuse. There were still crumbs in it. There were still 2 cookies I hadn't thought to throw away, sitting in a plastic bag on my counter. They took everything. They took Sebastian's card. They asked me about the phone call. I told them every word. By New Year's Eve, Sebastian had been arrested. What came out in the weeks after was the kind of thing that rearranges the furniture of your mind permanently. You look at the same rooms, but nothing is where it used to be. Sebastian had debt. Not the ordinary kind. Not a credit card balance or a car payment behind. Real debt. The kind that comes with phone calls and threats, and a particular quality of fear. He had borrowed money from a private lender 18 months earlier, a large sum, the details of which I won't repeat because they're still part of a legal matter, and he had been struggling to repay it. He had also, it turned out, consulted with someone about what happens to an estate when the heir outlives the person who made the will by a specific number of days. He had done research, not careful research, the kind of research that leaves a trail. And he had known from the summer conversation that I was changing my will. What he had not known was the specific new amount. He had assumed, apparently, that I was cutting him out entirely. He wasn't willing to find out. He had decided that the version of events where I died before the new will was signed was the only version that worked for him. The cookies were for me, all of me, not shared, not passed along to a neighbor on a whim, not left on the counter because I was watching my sugar. For me, alone, Christmas night, a widow with no children who lived alone and who might not be found for a day or two if something went wrong. I have thought about that image. The version of Christmas where I was hungry that night instead of careful, where I sat down with a cup of tea and a couple of cookies and thought how sweet it was that Sebastian had remembered more times than I can count. It comes to me in the early morning sometimes, that other version. I let myself feel it, and then I let it go. What Sebastian could not have accounted for was Harriet. Specifically, what he could not have accounted for was that Harriet did not die. She was sick. She was genuinely, seriously sick. And for 2 days, I sat by her side at the hospital and held her hand and felt a guilt that didn't belong to me but lived in me anyway. But she's a strong woman, and her doctors were good, and she came home on the third day with strict instructions and a follow-up appointment, and a story she has since told at every church event I have taken her to. She's not angry at me. I want to say that clearly, because I asked her directly on the day she came home. I sat across from her in her kitchen with 2 cups of tea between us, and I said, "Harriet, I need to know if you're angry with me." And she looked at me for a long time with those clear gray eyes of hers. And she said, "Beverly, you didn't bake those cookies." That was all she said about it. Sebastian was charged with attempted murder. His attorney negotiated. I won't go through the legal details because they are still painful and because the final outcome, a guilty plea, a sentence, years in a federal facility, is both more and less than what I can articulate. I sat in the courtroom on the day of the plea. I watched him come in wearing clothes that were not his own, and I tried to find the 7-year-old with nightmares in his face, and I couldn't. His mother, my sister Agnes, did not speak to me for 4 months. I understood it. She is his mother. She wanted to believe something different than what the evidence said, for as long as she could. We have since spoken, carefully, gently, like 2 people who agree not to press on a bruise, and I think we will find our way back to something that resembles what we were. It will never be the same, but we are still sisters. Justine, Sebastian's sister, called me the week after the plea. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her, and what she finally said after she caught her breath was, "I'm so sorry, Aunt Beverly. I'm so sorry he did this. You were always the one who showed up for us." I didn't know what to say. I just told her I loved her. Marcus, the oldest, the one Sebastian used to roll his eyes at, the one he called boring and predictable and not ambitious. Marcus came to Dayton in February. He drove 4 hours from Columbus on a Saturday morning and showed up at my door with 2 bags of groceries and spent the whole day making me soup and cleaning my gutters and sitting with me in the living room in the evening, not saying much at all, just being there. I had always loved Marcus. I realized that February that I had maybe loved him more than I knew, and that love, like damage, compounds quietly over time. People ask me, and they do ask, more than you might expect, at church and at the grocery store and in the soft, sideways way that neighbors ask things, whether I blame myself, whether there was something I missed, something I should have seen. I have an answer now that I didn't have in the beginning. I saw it. That's the thing I've had to make peace with. I saw the questions about the house. I saw the shift in how he looked at me when money came up. That slight change in focus, like a camera adjusting its lens. I saw the loan conversations and the will questions and the way his phone calls got longer and warmer right around the time his debts got worse. I saw all of it, and I made the dignified, reasonable choice that most women in my position make. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself family doesn't do that. I told myself I had known this boy since he was born. What I know now, and what I would tell every woman sitting quietly in her house trusting the people she raised to love her, is that your instincts are information. That cold thing that crawled up my neck when I read his card was not paranoia. It was my body knowing what my mind wasn't ready to accept. I left the cookies on the counter because some part of me already knew. I updated my will again in March. My attorney is a calm, careful woman named Patricia, who has never once made me feel foolish for any of this. And sitting across from her desk in the early spring with the light coming through the blinds in long yellow strips, I felt something I didn't expect to feel. Relief, yes. Clarity, yes. But also a kind of grief that doesn't have a clean name. Grief for the nephew I thought I had. Grief for the years of birthday cards and holiday visits and the story I had built in my mind about a family that looked after each other. Grief for the version of myself that believed love was enough of a protection. The new will reflects my life as it actually is, not as I wished it were. Harriet is in it, more generously than before. Marcus is in it. Justine, the scholarship fund Raymond believed in, the church that has shown up for me every time something in my life has broken. Sebastian is not in it. I don't say that with satisfaction. I say it the way you say any hard, necessary thing, plainly and only once. There's a question someone asked in the comments of a story I heard recently about a situation not unlike mine. The question was this: which is louder? I forgive you or you no longer have access to me. I have thought about that question for a long time. Here is what I've come to. Forgiveness is not the same thing as invitation. You can release someone from the debt of your anger without handing them the key to your house. You can wish someone well from a long, safe distance. Forgiveness is something you do for yourself, quietly, so the wound doesn't stay infected. Access is something else entirely. Access is about what you allow to continue. I have done my best to forgive Sebastian. I think on most days I have. What I have not done is left a door open. What I have not done is told myself that love, even old love, even love with years and history and childhood memories attached to it, is a reason to ignore what someone has shown you they are capable of. The cookie sat on my counter for 2 days. The tin sat in my kitchen for a week after that, and every morning I walked past it and felt something I couldn't quite name, and the something turned out to be right. I am 64 years old. I live in my paid-off house in Dayton, Ohio. I walk every morning and do my crossword puzzle and have tea with Harriet on Thursdays and go to church on Sundays where people know my name. Marcus calls every Sunday evening. He started doing that in February and he has not stopped. I am careful now in ways I wasn't before. Careful about what I eat and who I trust and which voices I let into the quiet of my life. That carefulness is not the same as fear. I want to be clear about that. It is not fear. It is the particular kind of attention that comes from knowing firsthand that love can be performed, that kindness can be a delivery method, that a decorated tin of Christmas cookies can be the most dangerous thing someone has ever handed you with a smile. It is also, and I mean this without irony, the attention that kept me alive. Some lessons cost less than others. Some cost everything. This one cost me a nephew, a season of sleep, and the comfortable story I used to tell myself about my family. What it gave me back was something harder to name and worth more than anything in my will. It gave me my own clarity, my own eyes finally open all the way. And some mornings, most mornings now, that feels like enough. I spent a lot of time thinking about what Sebastian actually believed would happen, not the plan. I understand the plan now as much as I ever will, but what he told himself about it, what story he ran in his mind while he was baking those cookies, driving to the post office, writing my name on the card in that cheerful handwriting. I think he told himself I deserved it. That's the only way it makes sense to me. Somewhere in the months of debt and desperation and watching his own choices narrow down to nothing, he rewrote me into something he could afford to lose, something that was standing between him and what he needed. That's not a defense of him. It's just the thing I've had to understand in order to stop letting it hollow me out. Here's what I know about cause and effect. After 64 years of watching people make choices and live inside the consequences, nothing arrives without a history. Sebastian didn't become someone capable of this overnight. The greed was always there, quiet and patient, waiting for enough pressure. The willingness to take shortcuts, to borrow money he had no plan to repay, To look at his aunt and calculate her value in dollars. Those weren't new. I had seen the outline of it for years and called it something softer because I loved him and because it's hard to see clearly the people we have held since they were small. That's the part that requires the most honesty from me. Not about Sebastian, about myself. I was not naive. I was choosing comfort over clarity. And there is a cost to that choice, a real one, that I ended up paying in ways I never could have predicted. Harriet paid part of it too, and she didn't choose any of this. That is the thing about the consequences of dishonesty. They rarely stay contained to the person who made the decision. They spread. They find the people nearby, the innocent ones, the neighbors who love homemade things and open their doors and trust that a tin of Christmas cookies is exactly what it appears to be. What pulled me through, what I would point to if someone asked me to name it, wasn't luck, though. Luck was part of it. It was every small, unglamorous habit I had built over decades of living carefully. The morning walks, the crossword puzzle, the blood sugar warning in October that made me leave the cookies alone. None of those things felt significant when I was doing them. They were just the ordinary structure of a life maintained with some attention. But that structure was what saved me. Character isn't built in the dramatic moments. It's built in the quiet ones, the ones that don't seem to matter, and then it shows up for you when everything is on the line. Marcus driving 4 hours on a Saturday to clean my gutters. Harriet looking at me across her kitchen table and saying, "You didn't bake those cookies." Patricia calm behind her desk in the spring light. These people were in my life because I had spent years building a life worth showing up for. That's not an accident. The relationships that held me were ones I had tended. The ones that tried to destroy me were ones I had maintained out of obligation and sentiment, long past the point when they were giving anything back. I don't say any of this to be hard. I say it because I think there are women sitting in their own houses right now, being careful and quiet and loving people who are showing them exactly who they are and telling themselves the same things I told myself, that they're imagining it, that family doesn't do that, that love is enough. Love is not enough. Love is the beginning of something, not the protection itself. The protection is what you build from paying attention, from trusting the cold feeling in your neck, from leaving the cookies on the counter and waiting to see what the morning brings. I left them on the counter. The morning came. I'm still here.